chapter 22, and we're going to start with verse 54. I will be going to 3 different passages this morning, so just bear with me when we do that. I'm going to start at verse 54. It says, "Then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. And when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, 'This man was with him.' But he denied it. 'Woman, I don't know him,' he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, 'You also are one of them.' 'Man, I am not,' said Peter. About an hour later, another asserted, 'Certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean.' Peter replied, 'Man, I don't know what you're talking about.' Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word that the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly." So just a little backstory before this happened. Peter was standing tall among the disciples. He was one of Jesus' closest friends, and everyone knew that. So while they sat at the table, Jesus began to describe the hard road that he was about to face. And in that moment, that must have had to be an extremely difficult situation for Jesus. You see, he looks at his disciples, his closest friends, and says to them that they would all betray him. So Peter, he jumps up and he says, "Father, even if they betray you, I will not. I will die before that happens." Pretty bold statement there by Peter. And Jesus quickly looks back at Peter and says, "Oh, Peter, before the sun even rises and the rooster crows, you will deny that you even know me 3 times." And I couldn't imagine how Peter felt at that point. He was so, emphatic that, "I'm not going to betray you, Jesus." And you get told, "Yes, you will." It had to be an incredibly confusing time for Peter. So a few hours later, we all know that Jesus is arrested, and his disciples, they all scatter. Peter goes into the courtyard where Jesus is being put on trial. And the crowd's at a buzz. Peter's mind's probably super numb at this point. Thoughts are racing through his head. And the crowd that was once praising Jesus had now turned their backs against him. And they sat there waiting to see what would happen. In the midst of this crowd, someone turns to Peter, as we just read, and says, "Hey, aren't you from Galilee? Aren't you a follower of that man right there?" And Peter says, "No, I'm not." And then so 2 others ask him. And I can see Peter, in the tone in the scripture there, his voice starts to get more loud and probably angrier each time someone asks him this question. I can just see him saying, "No, I do not know him. Stop asking." And at that moment, the 3rd time that he said that, the rooster crowed. And what does it say? Jesus looked straight at him. And when Jesus looked straight at him, Peter knew exactly what he did. He denied Jesus 3 times, just like he said he was going to. And then once Jesus looked at him, Peter came to his senses, realizing what a mistake that he just did. And so he runs away. He's crying. He's weeping. Angry at himself. Feeling a sense of hopelessness and loss. Each of us, if we're being completely honest with ourselves, we have been where Peter was. A mistake we've made, a poor choice, words said, actions done. And for us as the believers, for us as Christians, we have that relationship with Jesus. So just like Peter, immediately after we sin, we come to our senses and we're filled with remorse and regret. So Garris Keller, who is the host of Prairie Home Companion on a public radio, he tells a story of a man who came to the altar 12 times at a church that they never gave altar calls, so everybody was wondering why he kept coming every Sunday. Sunday after Sunday, he would come to the altar and he would just cry his heart out. Every Sunday, he'd do the same thing. He kept repenting, but somehow he couldn't get beyond the repenting stage. You see, pretty soon the fundamentalists even got tired of him. Larry couldn't believe that Jesus could totally forgive him. Therefore, he couldn't forgive himself of the mistakes that he made. Instead of being free to move on, he came to church each week, constantly feeling guilty and trying to get back on track over and over again. So what do we do? How do we move on when we fail? How do we move on when we make a mistake like Peter did? How do we forgive ourselves? How do we let go of that shame, that guilt, and that regret? Well, it always starts with the relationship we have with Jesus. That's where we turn to John chapter 21, starting with 15. We need to turn to Jesus. It says this: when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than this?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you to where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." So as we walk through the steps that we need to forgive ourselves, we must keep in mind something. And it's a story of a man that's trying to cross just a main street. As he stepped off the curb, a car just comes screaming around the corner. And so he stops for a second. And then he tries to hurry up and get past the car before they even come again. He's trying to hurry across the street, but the car changed lanes and started to come right at him. The man started to get scared. And then he started to turn back around. And then the car changed lanes again, directly right at him. By now the car was so close, and the man was so scared that he just froze. He couldn't move. And he stopped right in the middle of the road. The car gets extremely close, and then swerves at the last possible minute. Comes to a screeching halt right next to the man. The driver rolls down the window. And it just so happens to be that the driver was a squirrel. And he said, "See, it's not as easy as it looks." How many times have those squirrels go back and forth and get out of the way? But I make that point to say this. When it comes to letting go of our guilt and our shame and choosing to forgive, it's not as easy as it seems. In fact, apart from Jesus, it's impossible. So again, the question is, how do we do it? The first step is realizing that Jesus is still there. In the midst of Peter's failures, when he betrayed Jesus, Peter returned to the only thing that he knew, and that was fishing. So Jesus, at this point, Jesus has risen, but for Peter, that made things worse. Jesus had appeared to the disciples several times, but each time Peter could hardly look at Jesus. He had failed him, and even if Jesus forgave him, how could he forgive himself? But even as a fisherman, the thing that he loved to do, he seemed to still be a failure. That night he fished all night and caught nothing. I want you to think, how did Peter feel at this point, knowing that he betrayed Jesus? Jesus is risen and he's right here, and you can't even look him in the eye because you did him wrong. But he says, I forgive you. But that burden is still there. That burden's still there. How depressed? He can't even fish anymore. I mean, the poor guy can't even catch a fish and try to catch a break. What was left for Peter? And then all of a sudden, he hears a familiar voice. The voice of Jesus. He was on the beach preparing food for them. See the point there? Jesus was still there. It didn't matter what Peter has done. Jesus was still there doing things that they needed done. The second step is letting Jesus heal the pain. Letting Jesus heal the pain. So after breakfast, Jesus calls Peter aside. And he does the same, asks the same question 3 times. And that's where the scripture comes in. The question was, Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? 3 times Peter had publicly proclaimed that he knew and that he loved Jesus. And by doing this, Jesus, he chose to replace an old memory with a new memory. You see, the old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. It's a lie. Each of us have minds filled with memories. Some of them are good memories. Some of them are bad memories. And some of those bad memories allow us to make choices in our lives that pretty much sometimes are good and sometimes are bad. Those bad choices and those bad memories can cause a lot of heart and hurt for us. So, what I'm asking today is that if we are hurting because of choices we made or choices someone else had made, give it to Jesus. Put it in the hands of Jesus. Let him heal your pain. Let him give you the courage to let it go. And the third key is to move on and move forward. Peter was not only to ask 3 times this question, but he was given a new task. As we go on through the scripture, Jesus says, feed my sheep. Take care of my sheep. Feed my lambs. So forget what you've done, Peter. That doesn't matter anymore because I have something I need you to do. Feed my sheep. Peter had failed. He had done the unthinkable. But yet Jesus not only still forgave him and loved him, but he had a plan and he had a purpose for Peter's life. He wasn't done just yet. I don't know if many of you have heard the story of the wrong way Angel. Wrong way, Regals. Roy Regal was a football player for UCLA. And in the Rose Bowl in 1929, he recovered a fumble for UCLA and started running the opposite way. So 65 yards he is running down the field, but he doesn't know he's running the wrong way. So his teammate starts sprinting down and tackles him before he can score for the other team. And then that caused UCLA to punt. But Georgia Tech blocked the punt and was able to score a safety and demoralized UCLA's team. So at halftime, the teams go into the locker room and everybody's sitting down, and Regals, he's just sitting there with a towel over his head and his face in his hands. And a timekeeper came in and said, "Coach, 3 minutes until game time. 3 minutes to the second half." The coach said this to the team: "Men, the same team that played that first half is going to play the second." So all the players stood up and started to walk out except one person, and that was Roy. He didn't budge. The coach looked back and called him, "Roy, let's go. Didn't you hear me? The same team that played the first half is going to play the second." Roy looked up and he said, "Coach, I can't do it. I can't do it. I've ruined myself. I've messed up so much, I can't go out and face the crowd anymore. I can't do it, Coach." And the coach said, "Come on. Get up and let's go back out there. We have another half to play." So Roy finally got up. He went onto the field. He played well that second half. What I want to get through with this story is that it doesn't matter how we start, it matters how we finish. Okay, and it makes me go back to a passage in the Bible in Luke chapter 15. And it's the story of the prodigal son. In Luke chapter 15, starting at verse 11, it says, Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So when he went and hired himself out to a citizen of the country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs, he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and I am here starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But when he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against you, and I have sinned against heaven. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to the servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they begin to celebrate. The younger son, like so many of us, want to live life as we please. And the son had to hit rock bottom. Absolute rock bottom. At the time, feeding the pigs was one of the lowest jobs you could do. It was degrading if you had to take care of the pigs. And He didn't have enough food. He wanted to eat what the pigs were eating. He had to hit rock bottom before he came to his senses. Sometimes it often takes great sorrow or tragedy in our lives to cause us to look to the only one who can help us. Just like Peter, the son came to his senses and decided to come back home. Right now, I'm going to have Brandon play us a video. It's a modern day video of the prodigal son. And it speaks volume. So if you will, pay attention.